Hello, Christopher Brent here, coming to you today with a musical podcast on becoming a piano teacher. So maybe you are someone who plays the piano and you play proficiently and you are interested in becoming a piano teacher, maybe starting your own piano studio. That's what I'm going to talk about today. So I am a piano teacher and music educator from Michigan here in the United States, and I do have a music degree in piano performance, but you do not need a music degree in order to start up your own studio and become a good piano teacher. There are a lot of piano teachers I know that do not have degrees in music, and they do wonderful things and have a flourishing studio, and they're doing amazing work. So you do not need a music degree. You basically need a good heart for teaching children, and you need to obviously be proficient enough to understand the basic concepts of playing, at least at an elementary to intermediate level. There are some piano teachers that don't play at an advanced level, and then once they get a student who gets to an intermediate or maybe early advanced level, they will pass that student on to another teacher who is qualified to teach very advanced students. So most of the time, though, we're looking at overall in the community, we're dealing with more beginners than we are advanced students. So if you have a good personality and patience, I should say, for teaching young people, then being a piano teacher might be a good profession for you. So let's talk about it. So there's different ways to go about teaching. You can go to a music school that provides piano instruction, that already has pianos and rooms available, and maybe a community interest in lessons that are already coming into that particular location. So there's students available to teach. So there's music schools. There's also piano retail centers or music retail centers that have music instruction of all instruments, and they're often looking for teachers. So there's positions out there. You can also start your own studio, perhaps out of your own house, or maybe you can rent space somewhere and just run an independent operation. That's what I do. However, I did teach at a music school, several music schools here in the Detroit area before I started my own studio. And as of right now, I don't teach out of my own home. I have a separate studio that I rent, and I'm in a great location. That's a big thing right there that you got to look at when you're going to become a piano teacher, especially if you're going to have your own studio and set up your own operation, perhaps in your own home. You got to make sure that you're in a studio that appreciates the arts, or in a community that appreciates the arts. You got to be in a city or an area where there is demand for musical instruction. So I am in the city of Troy, Michigan. That's where I have my studio. And Troy, Michigan is a great place to be when it comes to being right in the middle of a community and cultures that really appreciate music. And there's a good demand here. There's a lot of families that have children where they place musical instruction at a high priority. It's not just something, way last on their list. There are other communities where that is the case, where musical instruction and just a passion for the arts, that's not on their minds all that much. So you got to really do your research and make sure you're in the right area. Economically speaking, you got to make sure that it's at least, probably somewhat middle class. And then, I think like right in that middle class zone actually is a good place to be, because in some ways there's enough economical aspects going on where you can run a business that operates basically on the aspect of recreation. So people often, when you're looking at a recreational business, it's usually not the first thing on people's list, right? But if you are in an area where people really, really hold the arts in high esteem, it'll be a step higher, right? So they're going to be looking at music in a different way sometimes. Actually, very, very wealthy communities sometimes don't often appreciate the arts like kind of a middle class community does, but it varies, and you have to do your research, and you have to look into the cultures that are there. In the city of Troy, Michigan, there's a lot of it's a very diverse area, so there's many cultures and all walks of life that really appreciate the arts, and there's a real high demand for it. So it's a great place to be. So you got to just look at where you are, what part of the world you're in, and see if it's something that can work, because you can also do lessons over Skype, and that's kind of a new thing that's been going on the last 5, 7, 8 years or so. So that's another possibility too, if the community that you're in doesn't really demand piano lessons or music lessons all that much. So there's a lot of research to do, and that's really the case anytime you're starting up a business. So you want to do that. So I'm blessed to be in a great location. So that works out. But building your own studio requires a lot of work, and you've got to have a good policy in place, and you've got to have a good sense for things like knowing when festivals are in your community, and if you're going to have studio recitals on your own. You're doing everything on your own, really. If you teach in a music school, the music school itself sets up things like recitals and federation and festivals and all these things. So they're doing a lot of that work. They're doing the communication with the parents as far as scheduling goes. If you're teaching on your own, you have to set up your own schedule and communicate with parents and students and everything very thoroughly. So you've got to take all of that into consideration. Some other things to consider, probably the biggest thing if you're starting your own studio, is you have to make your own policy, and you've got to set your own rate, and you've got to figure out how you're going to deal with tuition and missed lessons and makeups, and if you're going to teach in the summertime, and all of these things, you have to figure that out and set that in stone so everything is clear when it comes to your students. When you teach for another music school or a piano retail place, they usually set that stuff up all on their own, and you're basically, you have to go along with their policy. So these are some of the things to weigh in when you are deciding whether you are going to set up your own studio or not. If you do set up your own studio, there are ways of getting students. That's really the first question everybody asks. Well, online, there's a lot of great outlets. Thumbtack.com is one. Lessons.com is another one. There's another website, takelessons.com, where you can get students. However, that's an agency that wants to keep a little bit more control going over a longer period of time. So you got to weigh that stuff in, and then they may want you to go to students' homes. That's another thing you have to decide too when you're becoming a piano teacher: is are you going to go to the student's home, or are you going to want the students to come to your studio? That's a big question, actually. And there's advantages to students coming to your studio. There, I think, are more advantages to students coming to your studio than the teacher going to the students' homes. But if the environment is good in the students' homes, then that's okay. Sometimes when you go to a student's house, there can be distractions. There can be, other kids kind of making noise in the house, or pets or things like that coming up to you, and you got all these other things going on, and it can be difficult to get a sense of just privacy, I guess, between teacher and student, and without other noise and things like that going on. But every house is a little different, so you gotta, just look at how you're going to deal with things. So those are important questions. There's a lot of things to go over in your mind about what you're going to do, where you're going to teach, if you're going to go to students' homes or not. So that being aside, putting that aside, then you've got to understand that you have to stay on top of things, right? Especially if you're someone who hasn't studied the piano for that long and you're somewhat proficient but not that proficient. You got to keep doing research and go to seminars, and you've got to really stay on top of things, because you want to stay one lesson ahead of the student, right? So you can't fall behind, right? There was a funny Simpsons where Marge Simpson suggested becoming a piano teacher as long as she stayed one lesson ahead of the student. So you got to do that, right? But you got to find new techniques as far as inspiring students, and you want to avoid burnout as a teacher. I'm going to do another podcast on piano teacher burnout. That's a really common thing. It can happen to the best of us. So there's ways of coming out of that burnout and reinventing yourself and reinventing ways of teaching students that inspire them. And so I'm going to talk about that. So if you're thinking about becoming a piano teacher, I would definitely recommend that you do it. Maybe spend the first year or two teaching at a music school or a local center in your area to just get some basics down for everything, and then maybe you can start your own studio after that. So I would advise you to do it, and don't think that you have to have a degree in music in order to do it, or even, a graduate. There are piano teachers who have graduate degrees and doctoral. They have a DMA and everything, and they're great teachers, obviously, and they're going to be very qualified when it comes to taking on very, very advanced students, right? But those students, those very advanced students are less common. There's less of them out there, right? There are lots of students lining up that want to try out the piano, and they're beginners and everything, so there's demand for teachers who can teach those students. And in many circumstances, it requires some obvious understanding of piano technique, but it requires a personality and the type of person that can be patient and deliver good instruction to young students. So I would definitely recommend give it a try. And there's ways of going about it now that are awesome, especially the online resources that are available for teachers. So if you have any questions, email me at chrisbrentmusic@gmail.com. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website at www.christopherbrent.com. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.